Hello, and welcome to ATG, the podcast. I'm Caroline Goldsmith, Associate Director of the Charleston Hub, and today we're doing a roundtable discussion around the topic of research impact. And we've invited three guests: Rachel Borchardt, who is a scholarly communication librarian and university library faculty at American University; Andrea Hebert, who is a research impact librarian at Louisiana State University; and Camille Gamboa, who is AVP of Corporate Communications at SAGE. And to all of you, I'd like to say welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And as I said, we're focusing on research impact and how we come to understand and measure it and its effects. And we're going to get the librarian perspective and the publisher perspective today and on what research impact is. And we're interested in the recent case study that SAGE conducted regarding policy maps, which is a free tool for individual researchers to determine their policy impact. But first, before we jump into all of that, let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. Tell us what you do at your institution and how you support research impact.
Okay, great. Well, very happy to be here. Thank you so much for hosting. So as you mentioned, I do communications and public affairs work at SAGE. And so beyond the traditional communications duties, I've been lucky enough to have been given the remit to explore how I can make and how SAGE can make the research that we publish more impactful. So exploring questions like, what does it take to make our research usable outside of academia? How can we solicit the type of research that will be helpful in policy and in practice? What constraints do we see as an industry to do this type of work? I get to explore all these really impactful, important questions. And so it's a really meaningful part of my job. Just quickly also to introduce SAGE. If you don't know SAGE, we are an academic publisher that was founded this year, 60 years ago. It's our birthday. And we are very independent, very mission-driven, very values-driven. And we have our foundations in the social and behavioral science. And so a lot of the work that we do in this area, a lot of what I will be saying focuses on supporting the unique needs of social science. So that's me.
I can go next. Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm the Scholarly Communications Librarian at American University, which is located in Washington, D.C. And a bit about American University: it is a private mid-sized university, and as of very recently, we now have the R1 designation, but we really pride ourselves on having a blend of teaching and research. And I think the other thing that's pretty unusual about us, since we're in the DC area, our focuses, our primary things that we're known for include policy, international service, government. So we really are, like SAGE, very social sciences focused. Not to say that we don't have STEM and other disciplines, but those tend to drive some of our most high impact research. For my job, part of my responsibilities include supporting and advancing research impact at the university, and that includes a wide range of activities from helping individuals with their tenure files and promotion to participating in university-wide initiatives related to research impact. And I'm also on an NSF grant that focuses on research translation and public impact at my university.
So I'll go ahead and wrap this part up. So I work at Louisiana State University, A&M. It's in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It's an R1, and it happens to be a public land, sea, and space grant university. We have about 40,000 students total, and there are 50 doctoral programs and about 3,500 graduate students. And LSU is known for its STEM programs. So my role as the research impact librarian is relatively new, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what my work looks like. So in addition to general ScholComm work, I do tend to work with individual faculty who are interested in improving the visibility of their scholarship. And I can discuss like traditional and alternative measures of scholarship and impact. And then sometimes that translates into talking to departments about those things. And I also give the institution and departments a broader view of their work and their impact using some of the more traditional measures.
Well, thank you guys for that introduction and giving us some background on you. Let's start with talking about how each of you define research impact and what it means to you, and if you feel like you have a different perspective from your colleagues, and how you define it.
So I think I used to define research impact as more or less synonymous with the metrics that we've traditionally used to measure it. So bibliometrics, citation counts, all that fun stuff. But I think today I would also describe it more as the total impact that all research and research outputs are having on a variety of individuals and populations. And I think that that can only be partially described and explained through metrics and qualitative measures.
So I agree with Rachel's definition. However, I think that my view probably differs from that of my institution. Universities generally worry about rankings, and some of the rankings are definitely tied to traditional metrics. And because of LSU's STEM focus, they are more accustomed to thinking about things like, plain old bibliometrics. And they are probably more open to accepting things like patent citations. However, before I was the research impact librarian, I was the librarian for the schools of social work, education, and leadership and human resource development. So I was always aware that their work was not necessarily well represented in those traditional metrics. So I've always been more able to see the value of things like policy.
And I think for me, I forgot to say, in terms of alignment with my university, it's been a process. I think when I first started getting interested in research metrics, there was more of a disconnect, and I was really excited about alt metrics as a way to start filling that gap.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, the NSF grant that I'm on, public impact is a really big focus for us. So, and part of our work is trying to better align the broad spectrum of impact that we see with university policy. And there are definitely clashes between things like wanting to support public impact, but still wanting that good university ranking.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was just about to ask about alt metrics and things like social media posts and the impact that those have, and if that's one of the things you're interested in. And speaking of that, the alt metrics and social media posts and all these, things now that we're looking at over the years, how have you seen the conversation change around research impact?
I can go. So I've been in the industry for 13 years, and I've definitely seen shifts in that time to greater emphasis on outside impact. I think, the three of us are on the same page. I agree with your definitions in terms of impact. And I think that we're starting to see that trickle out to the different kind of parts of the science ecosystem. The funders, for example, are starting to ask more and more that before they award a grant, that they're asking questions about what outside impact the research they're funding will make. Publishers, journals, and trade societies are putting more emphasis on research that supports the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for example. Universities are rewriting their tenure and promotion practices so they are more aligned with institutional values and less aligned with singular citation-based metrics that we were just talking about. And then we have organizations like DORA. I think one of my colleagues will talk about that in a minute. They're having these big picture conversations about how to improve our research, how our research is evaluated, so it doesn't all rely on impact factors. So there's definitely an evaluation, an evolution happening. It's maybe slow and steady, maybe slower than I would like it to be, but there is an evolution happening. At Sage, we are definitely part of these conversations. I mentioned before that we are trying to bring attention to the unique needs of social science. So, for example, data has shown that published social and behavioral science research is cited for longer periods of time in scholarly literature, even though we use this 3-year, 2-year, 3-year based measure. Actually, in the social and behavioral sciences, research is cited for longer periods of time than that. It also makes outsized impact on policy, and we'll talk about a new tool later on that can help us with this. But social science has kind of this unique value, these unique needs, and yet academe uses or overuses the same short-term literature-based metrics to decide what is successful science or not. So we're trying to talk about things in terms of social science because it's at our core.
I definitely agree with that. And I think one of the big shifts that I'm seeing happening very recently is just taking best practices from other disciplines who are more used to thinking about this more holistically. So, for example, the humanities has always relied more on qualitative measures than quantitative because their publishing practices are so different, and what is impactful in their field can't always be described by metrics. Or say community-based research, right, where the outcomes really depend on the community. You aren't necessarily looking for those citation counts, you're looking for community impact. So they've developed frameworks and models for measuring that kind of thing. And so taking those best practices and spreading them out and understanding, these don't have to be confined to one specific discipline or type of research, but can apply really broadly, and especially as we see more interdisciplinary research happening, and no one's necessarily just doing traditional research within a department or a school. I think we're seeing broader acceptance of these more holistic measures beyond their original, disciplines.
So I agree that there have been so many positive developments from including things like policy and patent and even open science, but I still think there are some barriers to moving away from these traditional measures. So, for example, in the United States, there are very few universities who are signatories of DORA. There may be some university libraries or even some departments within universities, but very few universities as a whole have endorsed it. And that's really problematic, right? One of DORA's key principles was that the scientific content of a paper was more important than where it was published. However, right, as I mentioned earlier, universities, or many universities, are very concerned with their rankings, and ranking agencies and AAU, rely on these traditional citation data. So where are they publishing? How many citations are they racking up? And so as long as universities are tied to that, their faculty are also tied to it. And that's unfortunate. I do know it's changing, but I wish it were changing more quickly in all places.
Why is looking at research impact important in today's cultural and political environment?
So I think higher education has a lot of significant issues right now, but one of the many issues is that we tend to silo our research work, and it excludes the majority of the population. It starts with access to research, which open access is trying to account for, but it also means delivering information in a way that the general public or other populations, practitioners, community members can understand and use, and more importantly, trust. Ultimately, I see it as the talking about return on investment. Where do your tax dollars go? If someone goes to college, how can we trust the information that's being given to those college students? These are really basic ideas that academia has only recently tried to grapple with, and by and large, it's still not reflected in the faculty incentive systems. And I include ranking in that, but promotion and tenure has the same problem of relying on those traditional metrics, and that tends to form the basis by which you get tenure. And these other considerations are definitely secondary. So if you're saying, I had this great public impact, everybody uses my work, but it's not cited, is that tenurable? And that's a question that I think higher education really needs to start taking seriously.
Right. So, I think it's very clear that a large section of the U.S. public have, they've lost confidence in research and the institutions which produce research. And our researchers do good work, but we are not doing a good job of showcasing how that work actually impacts the public as a whole. So moving to a more holistic representation of research impact could really help with this. For example, does the average person at the grocery store care whether or not, a paper was published in like a journal with a high impact factor? Probably not. They probably don't know what impact factor is. It's a very niche topic, and we forget that sometimes. But what they are interested in is how that research impacts their life in a positive way. I think if we talked about that more, it would really bring back some of that trust.
I totally agree with that. I just add just one other thing on that, which is to say that I remember back in 2016, which, if you can believe it, was almost a decade ago. Everyone was talking about these new terms called misinformation and disinformation. We were all talking about how, things like social media were spreading, bad information. And back then I kind of thought, oh, this is kind of a passing thing. It's a fad. If we as, higher ed and research, librarianship can get together, we can quickly tackle the problems associated with bad information so we can get back on the trajectory of valuing evidence, data, quality research, will be fine. Again, we're almost a decade later. I'm sad to say the problem of misinformation is at best normalized and at worst deepened. And additionally, of course, as my colleagues were just mentioning, at the federal level, funding and evidence-based policymaking are in a kind of precarious state right now. Lots of changes happening. As we all know too well, cuts are happening within science agencies, and some agencies are being told that the research that covers certain topics just cannot be funded. So it's almost as if a new definition of impact, one that ignores real people or evidence, is emerging, which is kind of scary. But there is some good news. I do think that we will get back on the right track. So, for example, in a recent survey that SAGE put out, more than 1,800 researchers, 92% of them said that the ultimate goal of research is to make a positive impact on society. 92% didn't, they didn't say the ultimate goal was, academic citations or, anything else. They said it's for research to make a positive impact on society. So their hearts are in the right place. And I think they do understand that their work can and should make a difference. So over the long term, I do think we'll get back to putting increased emphasis on the intersection of research and policy impact, government, real world impacts, and we're supporting research so that it makes impact is not something that we should give up on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking about, looking back the last 10 years, now we're going to kind of shift to looking forward to the future. And what changes? Rachel and Andrea, I'm going to ask you this about the librarian perspective on this first. What changes should be made for more effective impact of research, do you think, in your opinion?
So I think there's a really interesting opportunity to join conversations that are happening, both within librarians' individual institutions and more broadly, because we really have a unique perspective and knowledge on this topic. That said, there are relatively few research impact library specialists. And I think that's a missed opportunity for librarians to help shape these conversations as they happen. And I can say I've been doing research impact for about 12, 13 years. And I've only had it as part of my job responsibilities for about 3. So, I can count probably on 2 hands the number of research impact librarians that I know. So it's hard to see where this concentration of expertise is in libraries. And I think that there's a lot more opportunity to gain that expertise and to label it as such. Looking more broadly, the UK has really effectively organized around research impact. And that's largely thanks to the fact that there's this research excellence framework that all UK institutions respond to. But they've developed initiatives like More Than Our Rank. That's been a really good way for expert librarians to help shape the national conversation. For me personally, I've been lucky to be recognized as an expert at my university. So I often do have a seat at the table, and that's been part of how we've been able to get grants like this public impact grant. But more broadly, I think conversations about impact in the United States are happening without librarian input or expertise at the table.
So I can definitely affirm what she said, that most of the conversations are not occurring with research impact librarians at the table. I've only been in my role for 2 years, and I definitely do not have a seat at the table, and making progress is difficult, right? I'm having to leverage relationships, right? I always trade on social capital. I help the faculty that I know with their individual issues, hopefully by word of mouth. They reach out to other people, either in their own department or others. Eventually, departments will come to me for my expertise, and I'm hoping it eventually crawls up the chain. But I will say that my library dean has done a really good job of highlighting the fact that the library does have the expertise to university administration, but it has yet to translate into actual voice.
Camille, can you give us the publisher perspective on this and give us your
Sure.
thoughts?
Yeah, happy to. First, I want to say thank you for the work that you both are doing as research impact librarians, because you're right, there aren't very many of you. And that's kind of part of the reason why we wanted to have this conversation through the mouthpiece of the Charleston Hub, which, you know, has a great mouthpiece to a very powerful one to the library community. But yeah, in terms of what publishers can say, I think upholding the DORA's principles will help us have a more balanced approach to measuring research impact. I didn't realize until you said previously, Andrea, that so few universities were signed on. I think most publishers are, at least most of the bigger ones are, we are. But yes, it's not just signing it, but actually upholding those principles. So for example, when journal impact factor comes out every year, let's recognize them for what they actually are, which is a measure for the journal, and not a measure of the quality of the individual articles within them, or a measure of the researchers who publish in those journals. So if we can have these kind of more balanced, nuanced conversations and not rely or fetishize on one measure, we can improve the measures, and we can shift how our research is celebrated and incentivized. I'll just mention one other thing briefly, which is that SAGE is also looking into exploring the research on research impact. So the scholarly world can, and we believe should, turn its attention to itself to help make improvements. We can use our own scholarly research measures to talk about this and have scholarly conversations that will shed light on what's happening and where there's success happening and how we can spread that. So I'm excited about where that will take us. It's early days on this new project we have, but watch this space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. So what new tools and tech are available to support faculty and institutional leadership who want to recognize and celebrate this kind of impact?
Pick me. I've got a good one. I'm just so excited about this one, which is that SAGE has a new tool. You mentioned it before, Caroline, that lets researchers discover where their work is cited in policy documents. So researchers have always been able to find the academic citations of their work, at least as long as, you know, our industry has existed in the way that it does now. But with this new tool, they can now, for the first time, find the citations of their work by policymakers in policy documents across the globe. So what it is they go into this platform, they create a profile, they download their data with visualizations if they want, and then they get this personal shareable dashboard that they can also share around with all the metrics that related to the policy, how policymakers have used their work in policy documents. So we've developed it in partnership with Overton, who have the largest searchable index of policy documents. And perhaps the most exciting part about it is that we've made it free to use. So this is not something we're trying to sell to the library. We just want every researcher to benefit from it. And we want to help shift the research impact conversation through the use by these individual researchers. Researchers are telling us that they are using it for tenure and promotion processes, grant proposals. Personally, I've seen them tout their findings all over social media. If you actually go into LinkedIn or Blue Sky or wherever you go and you search SAGE policy profiles, you will see some really just like uplifting posts from researchers who are like, I just discovered today that my work was cited 36 times. That's 36 more times than I knew about. Or I just found out that the Brazilian government used my research. I had no idea it had that far-reaching impact. So it's really a piece of good news to see where it's going. Overton, who was our partner in this, they also have a tool for libraries and organizations. So while what we've created is free and it lets the individual researcher go in and find their impact, Overton also has a tool that can be used at the organizational level, where organizations can go in and search for policy citations of their colleagues, departments, institutions. So that's definitely one to check out as well.
I have to say, as a research, my research impact responsibilities, that moment of discovery that you just talked about is my favorite part. That when they're like, oh, I didn't know I was cited in this policy document, like it's such a great moment. But I absolutely second talking about the SAGE's tool. It is the only author level free altmetrics tool. There is altmetric has a bookmarklet where anything with the DOI, you can look up the basic altmetrics. You can't get the in-depth information, but a general sense, which does include policy citations. But it doesn't collect all of a researcher's work like SAGE does. So it's such an incredible tool. And the fact that it's free is really just almost unheard of, but it really speaks to SAGE's values, which I greatly appreciate. For our institution, I definitely recommend both of those tools for individuals, but I think there's also a lot of value at the institutional level of being able to describe these things, as an institution rather than at the author individual article level. So we use altmetric. It's one of the institutional tools that you can use, and one of the more interesting things that we did with it when we went up for reaccreditation, you do a self-study, so you write about yourself. And in the research chapter, we were able to take altmetric data about the rate of our policy citations and compare it to other top policy schools. And demonstrate we are actually getting cited more frequently in policy citations than any of these other top policy. So for me, the benchmarking analysis capabilities of institution level tools is really exciting and something that I think people are just starting to think about, because altmetrics, as a form of benchmarking metrics is still kind of a weird concept and doesn't quite match the same way that institutional bibliometric tools like Insights or something like that would do. But that's what we use to really try and highlight the kind of impact that we're having.
So Camille and Rachel covered the big tools. I will say that for individuals who are looking for additional ways to enrich the way they describe their impact, there are the freemium tools or versions of Dimensions and Lens that can give them a little bit of a broader view. But again, as I said, Camille and Rachel covered the big ones.
Okay. And we've already, talked about this some, but Rachel and Andrea, can you guys tell us more about how librarians can take advantage of these tools?
So I think, all of the tools that we mentioned that are free or freemium are a really good place to start because, some institutions have more access to things like altmetrics, some don't. And if you don't have access, it can be really hard to gain familiarity with it. But just going in and playing around with dimensions, sorting by altmetric attention score, looking yourself up even, these are all things that are really good ways to start to gain more familiarity with what's out there and how you can then help other people, at your institution. I think the other thing to note is that often libraries have the database access to things like Dimensions or journal citation reports, Insights, whatever it is. But there are some tools, especially I'll pick on academic analytics, where they tend to market more to the administration and less to the libraries. So we may not be paying for that subscription as the library and may not even have access to it. That's at least was the case at my institution. We had academic analytics for a number of years, but we were able to say, hey, we have some expertise in this area. We could help support the people who are using this product, and we're able to gain access, and then we're able to gain familiarity with what's in there so that we could support the rest of our campus in its use. So that's another recommendation I always have is if there are tools you don't have access to, pitch your expertise, pitch your knowledge and say, I think I can add a value here. To the way we're already using those tools.
So similar experience with academic analytics. I will say the first time we asked for access, we were told no. So we waited a few years until somebody else was in the position to give us access and they granted it. So if you're told no, don't give up. Again, playing around with the tools that you do have access to is a great way to start. I ended up as the impact the Research Impact Librarian by accident, mainly because I did spend time exploring the tools. So whenever someone had a question, it would come to me. And so I gradually built that experience over time. I do think it's important to take a little bit of a step back and actually look at how the tools are constructed, like where are they pulling their data from, and what do those numbers actually represent? Because when you explain it to faculty, it's easier for them to accept like the advantages and the limitations if you can give the reasoning behind the numbers.
I love that you came into your job role by accident, a self-made expert. I love that.
I think that's a pretty common experience from the research impact librarians that I've talked to.
Yeah, no one goes to library school to become a research impact librarian. Honestly, mine's even sillier, and this feels like a very full circle moment. I used to co-host an instruction podcast, a library instruction podcast, and trying to describe how that was a scholarly output and that it had like reviews, that it was integrated into courseware at the graduate level. It was getting reviews on blogs because this was back when blogs were a big thing. That is what led me down the path to altmetrics. So it was a very self-serving interest, but then I started getting more interested in what are all these different measures and why do we only count this type of output as a scholarly output and, you know, contributing to scholarship and tenure and not necessarily these other things.
How long ago did you do your podcast?
I think it was 2009 to 2011 was when. So I used to have this like 1-page sheet of like, here's how many people are downloading and subscribing, and here's all of the ways that it's getting integrated and mentioned. It was a lot of manual labor.
Yeah.
So I wish in retrospect we would just put DOIs on it so we could track it all today. But, you know, we didn't really think that far ahead 15 years ago.
So interesting.
The work that you're all, I've said this already, but the work that you are all doing as research impact librarians is so important. I've seen, for example, a few LibGuides pop up that mention tools like Sage Policy Profiles. So that's a really helpful thing that you do. And people will come to us and say, yeah, I saw this from my library, my librarian, or my LibGuide, or the LibGuide in my institution, et cetera. So it really makes a difference.
Yeah. And the case study, Camille, can you tell us some about that, about the case study you did with Policy Maps?
It's similar to what I was saying before, just the great use cases that we've seen online. I wish I could share my screen so I could show you like all of the case studies that we've had come up, where people have said, I've got dozens of them where people have said, with the, they'll post their map because one of the visualizations within the platform of Sage Policy Profiles is a map. So you can see, like Brazil, like I said before, or in the United Nations or whatever, they just come up and they post them online for anybody to share, which we love. So yeah, I've got dozens of case studies. Anyone, anytime. And if anybody wants to share more, I would love to hear those too. Just examples of work of how the Sage Policy Profiles is making impact. And also, I would love to hear from anyone who's listening to the podcast about kind of where they see changes and success happening. As I mentioned before, and I think the three of us mentioned that there is an evolution happening, but it's happening like little by little, incrementally. So if there's an institution that said, actually, we did this in our institution and it really shifted things for us, we're kind of collecting those case studies too, and thinking about having kind of how we might have a more scholarly in conversation and analyzing and spreading the word about those case studies as well. So please do send those my way if you have them.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much today. This was very interesting and insightful. So thank you for sharing this free resource with us. That dashboard aspect sounds really cool. But thank you for joining us today. Do you guys have anything else to add, or?
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for talking with us today.
Really important. Thank you.
Thanks.